The thistle tincture was 3 drops light, and that was the first wrong thing Cassia Rowe noticed that morning. The second was the sound of a carriage grinding gravel at a dead run past the stillroom window before breakfast, fleeing Calderhurst Hall as though the house itself had bitten someone. She did not yet know whose name would be attached to the flight, or that by the time the leaves turned, she would be asked the very question that had sent that carriage running, not once, but 3 times, and that her answer the 3rd time would put a duke on his knees in front of half the parish. Had she known, she would still have measured the drops again, corrected the tincture, and gone on with her mourning. Because that was the whole of what she understood about surviving in a house that was not hers. Attend to the thing in front of you, and let the rest come when it came. She corked the bottle. She set it back on its shelf, label facing outward, the way her father had taught her a ledger ought to be kept, every entry findable by a stranger, in case the keeper of it was ever not believed. Below the window, in the flagged passage that ran between the kitchen and the servants' hall, she heard Nan Pettibone's voice pitched low and delighted, the voice Nan used only for scandal. Gone before her chocolate, Nan was saying. Lady Honoria Fitzwarren, packed and gone, and her maid weeping into the hamper. That is the second one this year. Mark me, the second lady to refuse the Duke of Calderhurst, and live to tell it, though I do not know how she dares tell it, for they do say no woman refuses the Duke twice. Cassia came down into the passage, with the tincture tray balanced on her forearm, not because she meant to be seen, but because the still-room stair led out nowhere else, and Nan caught her sleeve before she could pass. "You did not hear that," Nan said. "I did not say a word." "You said several," Cassia said, and loudly enough for the scullery. Nan wiped her hands on her apron, a habit she kept for moments when the truth wanted delivering plain. "Then you heard it, and you will keep it to yourself, because a companion who gossips about her betters does not stay a companion long, and you have a grandmother upstairs who cannot be bathed and dosed and read to by anyone else in this county, not even for double your wages." That was true, and it was the whole of Cassia's usefulness at Calderhurst Hall stated, without unkindness. She managed the old Duchess's medicines, her moods, her failing eyes over her correspondence, and she did it for a wage that kept her fed and a roof that was not her own, which was a great deal more than a bailiff's orphan daughter had any right to expect, and she had long since stopped expecting more. She asked, because she could not help herself, why does he ask them at all if he does not mean to be refused? Because his grandfather's will says he must marry before his 30th birthday, or the unentailed land and the guardianship of Miss Beatrice pass out of his hands entirely, into hands I will not name in a public passage, Nan said, and her voice dropped lower still. Michaelmas, it will be, 3 months come. And he has asked 2 ladies of good family in as many months, and been refused twice. And a man who is refused twice does not often try a 3rd time, not with his pride. Then who inherits, if he does not marry in time? His cousin, Nan said, and said no more, because a footman came through with the coal scuttle, and the subject changed itself the way subjects did in a house full of ears. Cassia carried the tray up the back stair to the Duchess's rooms, and did not think again of dukes and deadlines until she came around the gallery corner with her arms full and walked directly into the Duke himself, coming the other way at the pace of a man who wanted to outrun his own house. She did not drop the tray. That, later, she would understand was the first thing he noticed about her. Not her face, which she had long ago stopped expecting anyone to notice, but the steadiness of her hands under a shock that would have made most women shriek and shatter glass across a Turkish carpet. He caught the tray's edge anyway, out of instinct, and their hands met on the same silver rim for the length of one breath before he stepped back and let her have it. "Your pardon," he said. His voice was quiet in the way of a man who had never needed to raise it, and there was something wrong beneath the courtesy of the words, a tightness at the jaw that a stranger might have called temper, and that Cassia, who had spent 7 years reading the small print of other people's faces, read instead as a man holding a very heavy door shut with his shoulder. "None needed, Your Grace," she said. "The tray survived." "I am not certain the morning did." It was a forward thing to say to a duke 3 hours after his second public humiliation, and she knew it as she said it, but she had never learned the trick of holding her tongue when the truth was standing in front of her wearing a plain face. He looked at her properly then, for the first time, the way a man looks at something he has walked past every day without seeing. "No," he agreed. "I do not think it did." Then, he was gone down the gallery, shoulders set square as a door braced shut, and Cassia went on to the Duchess's room with the tincture, and did not think. Could not have thought that she had just had the first of the conversations that would end with him on his knees on the village green, with the whole of Michaelmas Fair looking on. She only thought, setting the tray down by the old woman's chair, that a man who apologized to a companion for nearly overturning her tray on the worst morning of his month was either better bred than his cousin gave him credit for, or hiding something considerably heavier than pride. The Duchess, when she was lucid, which was most mornings and fewer afternoons, liked her letters read twice, once for the words, and once, as she put it, for what the words were too polite to say, and it was over the second reading of a letter from a cousin in Bath that Cassia learned the shape of the house she had been living in for 3 years, without quite seeing its corners. "My grandson," the old woman said, tapping one knuckle against the arm of her chair, "has asked 2 women to marry him this season and been refused twice, and everyone in this county has decided it is because he is cold." He is not cold. He has simply never learned to ask for a thing without also handing over a ledger of reasons, as though love were a lease to be read over before signing. "Perhaps the women wanted the reasons," Cassia said. "Perhaps they wanted to be asked," the Duchess said, "which is a different thing entirely, and a lesson it took me 60 years and one very stubborn husband to learn." She was quiet a moment, turning a ring on her finger that had gone loose with age. "You keep my accounts better than my own steward did, child. Do you know why I trust you with them? Because I have no family left to bribe me," Cassia said, which was the truest and least comfortable answer, and the old woman laughed, a dry sound like paper folding. "Because you set the household ledger straight within a fortnight of coming here, and never once asked for credit for it. My grandson's cousin does the opposite, Mr. Edmund Vane has managed this family's business for 11 years and has never once let anyone else near a single figure in it, which I have always found a curious kind of devotion." Cassia filed that away the way she filed every stray fact in this house, without knowing yet which drawer it belonged in, and read on to the second letter and did not know that she had just been handed, in passing, the first thread of a rope that would eventually hang a man. Below in the stable yard that afternoon, she heard the Duke's voice again, lower this time, speaking to a groom about a colt gone lame, and she could not help noting, it was the whole of her training, that his hands on the animal's foreleg were a working man's hands, calloused at the palm in a way no duke's hands ought to be, and that he handled the frightened creature the way she handled a frightened old woman's temper, with patience that cost him something and never showed the cost. She thought, not for the first time, that a man's hands told more truth than his face, and went back inside to correct the household accounts before Mr. Vane's quarterly audit, not knowing that the very ledger she was straightening would, before autumn, be called a forgery, and that the forger would not be her, Mr. Edmund Vane came to Calderhurst Hall on the first Tuesday of every month, and Cassia had learned to set her afternoon by his arrival the way one sets a clock by church bells, with the same faint dread. He was, by every outward measure, the most agreeable man in the county, beautifully dressed, never a hair disordered, gloves so white they seemed never to have touched a door handle, though he touched every handle in the house as though he owned it, which in a certain narrow legal sense he might soon come to. He found her in the small library, correcting a column of figures against the apothecary's bill, and stood over her shoulder longer than courtesy required. "You have a gift for numbers, Miss Rowe," he said. "Unusual in a companion." "I was taught young," she said, not looking up. "By your father, I collect." "The unfortunate Mr. Rowe," he said it gently, the way one might mention a grave one had passed on the road, and the gentleness was the worst part of it, because Cassia had learned in 7 years that the people who hurt hardest in this world rarely raised their voices to do it. "My father is not a subject I discuss with visitors. Mr. Vane, of course not," he said, and smoothed his glove over each finger in turn, a small private ritual she had noticed before, and would notice 100 times more before she understood what it meant. "Only I should hate for history to repeat itself in this house. Figures have a way of going astray when the wrong hands are trusted with them. It happened once before, did it not, in your father's time? I should be very sorry to see a daughter walk the same road as her father. It was not a threat, not in any word she could have repeated to a magistrate. It was a warmth laid over a blade, and she felt the edge of it without being able to point to where the warmth ended and the steel began, and that, she would learn, was the whole of Mr. Vane's art. I keep an honest column, sir, she said. Then you have nothing to fear, he said, and smiled, and left the smell of orange flower water hanging in the room behind him like a closed door. That night, mending a torn hem by the last of the candle because a companion's wages did not stretch to a maid of her own, Cassia thought about the word unfortunate and about the way Mr. Vane had used her father's disgrace the way another man might use a paperweight, lightly, to hold something else in place. Her father had been under steward at Calderhurst for 11 years, the same 11 years Mr. Vane had managed the family's business, and in the 12th year Thomas Rowe had been dismissed for theft from the estate accounts and had died the following winter of what the doctor called a weakness of the heart, and what Cassia, at 17, had privately called shame, because she had watched it kill him one silence at a time. She had never believed the theft. She had never been able to prove otherwise. She had only kept, in a small trunk at the bottom of her single traveling chest, one brown-covered ledger of her father's private notes, written half in a merchant's cipher he had taught her as a child game before bed, numbers and letters swapped like a riddle, and she had never once, in 7 years, found the courage or the occasion to sit down and read it properly, because grief, she had discovered, made excellent cowards of the bravest people. She blew out the candle and told herself, as she told herself most nights, that some doors were better left shut, not knowing that the deadline pressing on the house around her, Michaelmas, 3 months off, a duke's birthday, a cousin's patient smiling wait, would not let that door stay shut much longer, for her or for anyone else beneath that roof. 2 mornings later, the Duke of Calderhurst found her in the still room before the household was fully awake, measuring willow bark into paper twists for his grandmother's joints, and stood in the doorway with the particular stillness of a man who has come to say something and is only now discovering he does not know how to begin it. Miss Rowe. Your Grace, my grandmother tells me you set her accounts straight within a fortnight of your arrival. Your grandmother exaggerates my talents to annoy Mr. Vane, Cassia said, and heard him make a sound that was not quite a laugh, more the ghost of one, quickly suppressed, and filed that away too. without knowing it was the first entry in a ledger she would keep on him without meaning to. "I have a proposal to put to you," he said, "and I would ask you to hear the whole of it before you answer, because I suspect your first instinct will be to refuse." "That is a curious way to open a proposal, Your Grace." "It is an honest one," he said. "I find I have run out of the other kind." She set down the willow bark and gave him the whole of her attention, because a man who admitted to running out of dishonesty was, in her experience, either about to be very truthful or very dangerous, and either way deserved watching. She did not yet know which he would prove to be. She only knew, setting the paper twist aside and folding her hands, that whatever he was about to ask, she had already decided. Some stubborn, untaught part of her had already decided that she would not give him an easy answer, not the first time, and perhaps not the second either, and that the deciding of it, though she could not have said why, felt less like defiance than like the first honest thing she had done in this house in 3 years. He did not sit, and he did not ask her to. He stood with his back very straight, the door held half open behind him, as though he wanted a witness to his own good conduct, and said the thing plainly. The way a man reads out the terms of a contract he has already resigned himself to losing. "My grandfather's will requires that I marry before my 30th birthday, which falls at Michaelmas, or the unentailed properties and the guardianship of my sister pass to my cousin, Mr. Vane, as trustee. I have asked 2 women of my acquaintance to marry me this season. Both refused. I do not intend to ask a 3rd woman of my acquaintance, because I have come to understand that the asking itself does damage I cannot afford to keep doing. I am asking you instead, Miss Rowe, because you are not of my acquaintance in the way society means it, and because you are, by every account I have gathered, the most competent person under this roof, and because my sister already loves you, and because I believe you would manage this house, and her and my grandmother better than any lady I have danced with this year. I am offering you a settlement, a home, and my name. I am not offering you affection I have not yet earned, and will not pretend to." Cassia let the silence sit a moment before she answered, because she wanted him to hear how deliberate her refusal was, not a flinch, but a decision. "You have priced this very carefully, Your Grace." "I thought it fairest to be plain." "It is plain," she said. "It is also an insult, though I do not think you meant it as one. You have offered me everything a ledger can hold, and asked nothing of me but my signature. I keep your grandmother's accounts, sir. I know precisely what an entry looks like when nothing is owed on either side but money. I will not be entered into your books that way." Something moved behind his eyes, quick and unreadable, gone before she could name it. "Then you refuse." "I refuse," she said, and watched him absorb it the way she imagined he absorbed most blows, without a flicker crossing his face, though his hand, resting on the doorframe, closed once, hard, and then deliberately loosened, a man resetting his own grip on himself. "I am told," he said, "that this makes me a man refused 3 times in one season, though only twice in truth, since you are not of the season at all." "I have heard the saying," Cassia said. "No woman refuses the Duke twice. I confess I had not expected to test it from quite so near, nor had I expected to be tested by my grandmother's companion over a paper of willow bark," he said. And there it was again, that near laugh, held back before it could fully arrive, and she thought, watching him go, that a man who could nearly laugh in the middle of his own humiliation was either a fool or the most disciplined person she had ever met, and she suspected, with the particular dread of a woman who has just refused a duke and knows it will not be the last time she is asked, that he was the second. Word of the refusal did not travel the way the first 2 had, because no one below stairs quite believed it, and Nan Pettibone cornered her in the linen room that same evening, with her hands already on her hips before Cassia had said a word. "Tell me it is not true. I do not know which part you mean." The part where a duke asked his grandmother's companion to marry him in a stillroom, and the companion said no, as though she were refusing a second helping of pudding. "I said no, because it was an honest offer of a dishonest arrangement," Cassia said, folding a sheet with more force than the task required. "He wants a wife the way a farmer wants a fence post. Sturdy, useful, unlikely to complain of the weather. He is a duke facing ruin girl, not a villain in a chapbook." "I did not say he was a villain," Cassia said. "I said I would not be a fence post." Nan studied her for a long moment, the shrewd look she kept for accounts that did not quite balance. "You have gone and done the one thing nobody in this county has managed in 6 years, which is tell that man no and mean it. And I will say this for you, Cassia Rowe. It is either the bravest thing I have seen a servant do in this house, or the first sign that you have finally lost your good sense entirely, and I have not yet decided which. Perhaps it is both," Cassia said, and Nan laughed despite herself, a short bark of a sound, and swatted her with a pillow slip, and the moment passed into the ordinary rhythm of the house, folding and counting, and the fire banked low for the night, and neither of them knew that Mr. Edmund Vane had been in the passage outside the linen room for the better part of the conversation, standing very still, smoothing one glove finger by finger, filing away the news of a refusal, the way a man files away a tool he has not yet decided how to use. The season turned toward August, with the deadline no nearer solved, and it was in that stretch of long warm evenings that Cassia and the Duke fell, without either of them quite naming it, into the habit of working near each other. She managed his grandmother's medicines and correspondence. He managed the estate's books himself now, since his cousin's last audit had left him, he said, with more questions than answers, and the library became a shared country between them, she at one end of the long table with the household accounts, he at the other with the estates, the silence between them companionable rather than empty. It was over those evenings that she learned, in the compressed and sideways way people learn such things, the shape of what had made him. His father and elder brother had died within the same winter, a fever that took the household by surprise and left him a duke at 22 with a grieving grandmother, an infant sister, and an estate he had been raised to admire from a comfortable distance and never to run. "I did not want it," he told her once, not looking up from the column he was checking. "Any of it. I wanted to breed horses and be left alone. My brother wanted it. My brother would have been good at it." "You are not unbad at it yourself," Cassia said, "if the harvest returns you showed me last week are any indication." "You checked my harvest returns." "I check everything that comes within reach of my pen, Your Grace." It is a fault my father gave me. It was the first time she had mentioned her father to him without being asked, and she felt the small cost of it. A coin spent she had not meant to spend, and he set down his own pen and looked at her properly. "Nan tells me your father served this estate." "He did." "He was dismissed for theft and died believing himself innocent. And I have spent 7 years unable to prove he was right, because the man who dismissed him is the same man who has managed this estate's books ever since, and I have never once been permitted near the old accounts to look." She had not meant to say the whole of it. It came out of her the way water comes through a crack once the crack has widened past holding, and she watched him take the weight of it without flinching. The way he took everything. And when he spoke his voice had gone very quiet, quieter than she had yet heard it. "Then we are both of us waiting on the same man's honesty, Miss Rowe, and I begin to think neither of us should hold our breath for it." It was not a joke, not quite, but it sat close enough to one that when she laughed, startled, he smiled. Actually smiled. the corners of his mouth moving in a way she had not seen since her first week in the house, and she thought, with the particular clarity of a woman cataloging evidence, that she had just witnessed the Duke of Calderhurst's first real laugh in longer than anyone below stairs could likely remember, and that it had cost him nothing and cost her a great deal, because a man's first laugh, once witnessed, is very difficult to stop wanting to hear again. She did not tell him about the brown ledger in her traveling chest. That was the one card she kept back, even in the warmth of that evening, because some griefs are not ready to be spoken, merely because a door has opened a crack, and she told herself she was protecting her father's memory from a hope that might prove false, though a smaller, more honest part of her suspected she was protecting herself from hoping at all. "There is a thing I have not told you," she said instead, testing the water of it, "about my father's dismissal. I do not have proof. I have only a suspicion I have carried 7 years and never dared open the trunk to look at properly." "Then look," he said. "I cannot help you carry a weight you will not set down." "Not yet," she said. "When I am ready, you will be the first to know it, Your Grace. I promise you that much." He accepted the promise the way he accepted most things from her, without pressing, and it was that restraint, more than any of his careful proposals, that she found herself thinking of long after the candles had been snuffed, because a man who could want an answer and still wait for it seemed to her, that August, a very rare thing indeed, and she did not yet know how soon his waiting would be tested past bearing. The blow, when it came dressed as an audit. Mr. Vane arrived on the first Tuesday of September with 2 clerks and a folder of papers he laid on the library table with the ceremony of a man laying out a winning hand, and asked with terrible gentleness that Miss Rowe be present, since the discrepancies concerned entries in her own writing. "There is a matter of the Duchess's apothecary account," he said, and drew out a page, and turned it so the Duke could read it without touching it, a courtesy that felt, to Cassia, like watching a man hand over a loaded pistol grip first. "Willow bark, purchased in quantities considerably beyond what the household requires, billed to the estate, the excess sold, I believe, at private profit. The hand is Miss Rowe's. I checked it myself against a dozen other entries. I am very sorry to bring this before you, cousin, truly I am. But I could not in conscience let it pass unremarked, not with the family's good name so recently under strain." Cassia's first thought, absurdly, was of her father, of a page laid on a table years before she was old enough to see it, and how the shape of this moment matched the shape of that one so exactly that for a heartbeat she could not speak at all. Her second thought was colder and steadier. The figures were wrong. She had never entered a quantity she had not measured herself, and someone had gone into her ledger and altered it, or copied her hand closely enough to pass for it in poor light. "I did not write this," she said, when her voice returned to her. "The hand is close," Vane said, not unkindly, "but hands can be close without being honest, Miss Rowe. It happened once before in this house, did it not? I have always thought there is a particular tragedy in history repeating itself in the very rooms where it first occurred." "Enough," the Duke said, and it was the first time Cassia had heard real iron under his quiet, though he did not raise his voice to do it. "You will leave the ledgers with me, Edmund, and I will examine them myself in my own time. And I will not have accusations laid at my grandmother's own table like a hand of cards." "Of course," Vane said, and smoothed his glove finger by finger, and smiled at Cassia with an expression that looked, for one unguarded instant, almost like pity. "I only meant to spare you further embarrassment, cousin, before it went further than this room. Some mistakes are kinder caught early." He left the folder and left the room, and left behind him, hanging in the September air, the particular poison of a lie built mostly of truth, that the hand was close to hers, that her father had once stood accused in the same house, that history did have a way, sometimes, of repeating itself on people who could least afford it repeating. The quarrel, when it came, was not between Cassia and the Duke, not directly, though it felt that way to her for one terrible hour before either of them understood the shape of it. He asked her, gently, whether there was any chance at all, that a clerk under her direction might have made an error she had not caught, and she heard in the gentleness of the question the shadow of a doubt he had not meant to show her, and something in her that had been holding steady for 7 years came briefly, dangerously loose. "You are asking whether I am my father's daughter in truth," she said, "whether the theft runs in the blood like a fever. I am asking nothing of the kind. You are asking it without the words, which is worse, because it means you have already half decided and are only being courteous enough not to say it aloud." He crossed the room to her, and she saw, too late to soften her own voice, that his hands were not steady, that he was bracing himself the way he braced a door, shoulders set, and that whatever fear had prompted her outburst had prompted an equal fear in him. "I have not decided anything," he said, "except that I trust you more than I trust him, and that trusting you frightens me more than any ledger ever could. Because if I am wrong about you, I will have been wrong about the one thing in this house I believed I could still tell true from false." It was, she would understand much later, the nearest thing to a declaration he had yet made her, buried inside an argument, and she was too raw in the moment to hear it as anything but doubt, dressed in kinder clothes. That evening, his aunt by marriage, Lady Pruitt, who kept house for the family's town affairs and had never much cared for a companion with opinions, came to Cassia's small room with an offer wrapped in condolence, a generous settlement, a character reference that would secure a good position in another county, quietly, before the scandal could properly take root, no fault admitted on either side, everyone spared the unpleasantness of a public accusation. "It would be so much kinder, my dear, to everyone, if you simply went," Lady Pruitt said, laying an envelope on the washstand as though it were a gift rather than a price. "Kinder to whom?" Cassia said. "To the family. To yourself, most of all. No one need ever say the word theft aloud." Cassia looked at the envelope a long moment, thick enough to be a year's wages, perhaps 2, and thought of her father, who had been offered no such kindness. Only a door shown and a name ruined without appeal, and she thought that the difference between his fate and the mercy now being dangled before her was not justice, but only money, and that if she took it, she would be buying her comfort with the same silence that had killed him. "No," she said. "I did not do this thing, and I will not be paid to pretend I might have. If you wish me gone, you will have to dismiss me outright, and say why in front of witnesses, and let it be judged as such." Lady Pruitt took back her envelope with visible relief, as though she had expected exactly this and dreaded it all the same, and left, and Cassia sat a long while on the edge of her narrow bed, with her hands folded, not shaking, though it cost her considerable effort not to, and thought that she had just refused the easiest exit she would likely ever be offered, and that some part of her, stubborn as her father had been stubborn, would rather be ruined honestly than saved by a lie. She was dismissed 3 days later, not by the Duke, who was away settling a tenant dispute and did not learn of it until it was done, but by the household steward acting on Mr. Vane's written authority as family trustee, and she left Calderhurst Hall on a gray morning with her one traveling chest and no character reference, walking the 4 miles to her father's old cottage, which stood empty and half-shuttered on land that belonged, technically, still to the estate, because no one had troubled to reclaim it from a dead man's memory. It was there, going through the trunk she had never had the courage to properly open, that she finally lifted out the brown-covered ledger, her father's private book, and sat on the cold hearth with it open on her knees, and began, with fingers that shook now that there was no one left to perform steadiness for, to read the cipher he had taught her as a child, letters swapped for numbers, a game turned suddenly, 12 years later, into evidence. It took her the better part of a night by a single candle to work through the early pages, and what she found there was not a confession, but the opposite. Her father's own careful, dated notes on a pattern of double billing in the apothecary and stable accounts stretching back years before his dismissal, and one line, near the last entries before the date of his disgrace, written plainly, without cipher, as though he had known even then that he might not live to explain it himself. If anything should happen to discredit me, it read, let it be known I found the second book before I lost my position, and not after. E.V. keeps 2 sets, one for the family and one for himself. I have hidden nothing. I have only understood too much, too late, to save myself the telling of it. She sat with the ledger in her lap until the candle guttered out, and did not weep, because there was no room left in her for weeping, only for the cold, clean anger of a woman who has finally been handed the shape of the wrong done to her and her father both, and beneath the anger, unbidden, the blackest question she had carried in 7 years, not whether she could prove it, but whether, once she did, anyone with the power to matter would choose to believe a dead steward's daughter over a living gentleman's smooth reputation, or whether truth, however proven, would simply be one more thing the powerful declined to hear. She did not go back to Calderhurst Hall the next morning to weep or to plead. She went to the market town of Marlowick, to the offices of Mr. Josiah Fenwick, solicitor and named trustee under the old Duke's will, a spare, precise man with ink-stained fingers who had known her father slightly and remembered him, to her lasting gratitude, as honest. She laid the brown ledger on his desk and asked him, plainly, whether a private account book, decoded and matched against the estate's current figures, could be brought as evidence before the quarter-day hearing already set to determine the Duke's compliance with his grandfather's will, since the family's trustees would in any case be gathered under one roof at Michaelmas. And there was no purpose, she said, in waiting for a second occasion to say what needed saying only once. Fenwick turned the pages a long while, comparing dates against his own memory of old audits, and said at last, "This will want corroboration, Miss Rowe." A dead man's cipher, however carefully kept, is not proof on its own, but it is a very good map of where proof is buried, and I have not seen a map this precise in 11 years of trying to make Mr. Vane's accounts add up to anything honest. Word of her inquiries reached Calderhurst Hall within 2 days, as such things always did, and it was Nan who brought the first sign that the ground beneath Edmund Vane had begun, at last, to shift, a whispered account. Gathered from the housekeeper's own sister in service to Lady Fitzwarren, that Lady Honoria, the second refusal, the carriage fled before breakfast, had gone not because the Duke had frightened her, but because Mr. Vane had shown her, 3 days before the proposal, a forged letter suggesting the Duke's own hand in his brother's fatal illness. A cruelty so precisely calculated that Honoria had fled the house rather than risk marrying into what she believed, wrongly, to be a family capable of it. Cassia went to Marlowick and found Lady Honoria still within reach, staying with an aunt while she decided her next season, and asked her, without preamble, whether she would put her account of that letter into writing, under oath, if it came to that. Honoria's hands trembled over the tea things, but she said yes, said it at once, said she had been waiting 3 months for someone to ask her the right question, and Cassia understood, hearing it, that she was not the only person in this story whom Edmund Vane had used and discarded, only the one who had happened to keep her father's book. Meanwhile, at Calderhurst Hall, though Cassia did not witness it herself and only heard it after, from Nan, who heard it from a footman posted at the library door, Messrs. Vane received a note that his old apothecary supplier, a Mr. Grissom of Marlowick, had been asked by a solicitor's clerk to bring his order books to the quarter-day hearing, and it was said, Nan swore it was said by the footman, who swore it by the housekeeper's sister, that Mr. Vane, on reading the note, set down his gloves on the table before him, and did not, for the better part of a minute, pick them back up. The first time in 11 years anyone in that house had seen him leave his hands bare in company. The quarter-day hearing convened at Calderhurst Hall on the morning of Michaelmas, in the long library where Keziah had once corrected harvest returns beside a duke who did not yet know he loved her, and it was, by design, both occasions at once, the formal proof of the duke's compliance or failure under his grandfather's will, and because Fenwick, as trustee, had the authority to call it so. An inquiry into the conduct of the estate's business in the years preceding. The room filled with more witnesses than the matter strictly required, because Fenwick, a careful man, had learned from 30 years of country law that truth spoken before a full room dies harder than truth spoken in a closed one. The Duchess sat by the fire in her shawl, restored these 3 weeks to more of her old sharpness than she had shown in a year, since the strange excess of willow bark and the stranger tonic Mr. Vane had insisted upon adding to her physic had both, at Cassia's quiet urging before her dismissal, been discontinued, and the old woman's hands had steadied, and her mind cleared in proportion, a fact Fenwick noted aloud. Early, as the first small stone in a wall he intended to build brick by brick. Lady Honoria sat near the window, pale but present, her written account already lodged with the clerk. Mr. Grissom, the apothecary supplier, stood twisting his hat by the door, a nervous man unused to rooms with more than one gentleman in them at a time, and Edmund Vane sat at the table's foot in an immaculate coat, gloves smooth on his folded hands, composed as a portrait, and Cassia, standing at the room's edge because she was no longer, technically, of the household, watched him arrange his face into patience and thought that she had never in her life seen a man work so hard to look as though he were not working at all. Fenwick opened with the ledgers, plainly, laying the estate's official accounts beside the brown book, page by page, dates aligned, and read the discrepancies aloud in a flat clerk's voice that made the numbers land harder than any accusation could have. Purchases doubled, and the excess sold privately. Tenant rents recorded short of what tenants swore they had paid. A pattern running 11 years deep, a pattern that began, Fenwick noted, in the same year Thomas Rowe first raised a quiet question about the apothecary account and was dismissed for theft within the month. I put it to you, Mr. Vane, Fenwick said, that Thomas Rowe did not steal from this estate. I put it to you that he found the very discrepancy we are examining today, 7 years too early for anyone to believe him. This is a dead man's diary, Vane said, and his voice, for the first time Cassia had heard it, carried an edge beneath the silk. A cipher kept by a disgraced steward, decoded by his grieving daughter, who has every reason in the world to wish her father innocent. It proves nothing but her devotion. It proves nothing alone, Fenwick agreed, mild as milk. Which is why I have also asked Mr. Grissom to bring his order books. Grissom came forward, hat still turning in his hands, and laid a slim volume on the table, and Fenwick turned to him and asked one question, only one, quiet and precise as a key turning in a lock. Mr. Grissom, who signed for the second order each quarter, the one entered in your book, but never in the estate's own accounts? Grissom looked, for a long moment, at Edmund Vane, who did not look back at him, who kept his eyes fixed on some point above the fireplace, with the terrible stillness of a man watching his own life come apart at a distance. And then Grissom's hands stopped turning his hat, and he said, plainly, into the silence, "Mr. Vane signed it himself, sir, every quarter, 11 years running. I have his hand in my book to prove it, and I will swear to it before any magistrate you like, for I have carried the weight of it long enough, and I am glad, God forgive me, to set it down." The room did not gasp, because rooms in that county did not gasp, but Cassia felt the whole weight of it shift at once, a held breath released, and watched Edmund Vane's composure crack for the first time in the whole long afternoon. Not into rage, which she had half expected, but into something smaller and sadder, his hands coming up to smooth his gloves finger by finger, over and over, the old habit run wild, a man soothing himself the way a child soothes himself, and Fenwick, watching it too, said not unkindly, "Mr. Vane, your own hand is in that book. There is no cipher left to hide behind." Vane's voice, when it finally came, had lost all its silk. "My father told me, from the time I could hold a pen, that a gentleman's worth was counted in what he kept clean, his hands, his books, his name. He said it every time I came in from the stables with dirt under my nails, and he said it at the end from his own deathbed, disappointed in me still, because I had never been given anything to keep clean with, only a cousin's inheritance to watch from outside a locked door. I did not set out to ruin anyone. I set out only to have, once, what I was told all my life I would never be given, and I told myself the ledgers were owed to me before they were owed to him." It was not an excuse, and Fenwick did not treat it as one, but Cassia, standing at the room's edge, felt something in her own chest loosen at the sound of it, a grief she recognized answering a grief she had not expected to find kin in. And she understood, for the first time, that pity and judgment could sit in the same room together without canceling each other out. The Duke rose then, and it was he, not Fenwick, who spoke the sentence, quietly, in the voice that had never needed raising. "You will not be prosecuted, Edmund, for my grandmother's sake and for the family name, which has borne enough this year. You will surrender the trusteeship entirely, in writing, this hour, and you will remove yourself to the property in Cumberland on a fixed allowance, and you will not set foot in this county again while I live. This is not kindness to you. It is protection for everyone you have not yet finished harming." Vane did not argue. He signed what was put before him with a hand that shook only slightly, and left the room without looking at Cassia at all. And it was, she thought, watching him go, the strangest ending she could have imagined to 7 years of grief, not triumph, but a kind of tired sorrow on every side of the table, the sorrow of people who had wanted, all of them, only to be believed, and had finally, at terrible cost, been heard. It was 3 days later, in the small garden behind the hall, where a robin had taken to singing each morning from the same low branch of the quincy tree, that the Duke found her packing the last of her things into the traveling chest, having accepted Fenwick's offer of a small independence, her father's name cleared, a modest settlement owed him restored to her at last. And having quietly decided that a woman with her own means owed no one an answer she did not wish to give. "I am told," he said, "that you mean to take a cottage near Marlowick and set up as an independent woman of business, correcting other people's accounts for a fee." "I am told the same," she said, not looking up from the folding of a shawl. "It is a respectable trade, and I find I have grown fond of ledgers that balance." "The crisis is resolved," he said. "Edmund is gone. My grandmother is well. The will's clause need never be tested again. since the guardianship threat is lifted regardless of whether I marry by Michaelmas or by any other day at all. I could let the deadline pass tomorrow and lose nothing but a birthday. I am glad of it, she said, and meant it, and waited, because she understood from the careful way he was standing, hands loose at his sides instead of braced against some door, that he had come to ask her something, and she had already decided, before he opened his mouth, what her answer would be if he asked it wrong again. "Marry me," he said. "Not for the estate. Not for my sister, though she does love you, nor for my grandmother, though she would dance at the wedding if her hip allowed it. I am asking because I have spent 3 months discovering that a house without you in it is a house with all the warmth let out of it, and I find I would rather be refused a 3rd time than never ask again." It was closer, she thought. It was so much closer than the still room, and closer still than the frightened offer of rescue he had made her once, in the raw days after her dismissal, which she had also refused, gently, telling him she would not be married to escape a scandal, only to answer a truth. But it was still, she noticed, offered here, in a private garden, with only a robin for witness. And she thought of her father, publicly ruined with no one to speak for him, and of herself, publicly doubted with no one but a solicitor and a nervous apothecary to clear her name. And she found, turning the shawl over in her hands, that she wanted, this once, something the ledgers of her whole careful life had never allowed her, to be claimed where everyone could see it. "No," she said, and watched him absorb the blow the way he absorbed all his blows, still faced, though his jaw tightened. "Not because the asking is wrong, Julian, because the asking is quiet, and I have spent my whole life being quiet, being the overlooked woman in the corner of other people's houses, correcting other people's mistakes and never once being corrected for, or claimed for, in front of a living soul. If you want my answer, truly want it, you will have to ask me somewhere the whole county can hear you do it, and be willing to be refused there too, because I will not be one in a garden where no one can call you a fool for kneeling to a companion's daughter. That is a very particular condition," he said, and there was, beneath the surprise, the beginning of something that might, in a moment, become a smile. "I am a very particular woman," she said. "You have had 3 months to notice." The Michaelmas fair filled the green at Marlowick 2 days later. The whole parish turned out for the last warm market before autumn set in properly. Stalls of apples and ribbon and roasted chestnuts, children chasing a piglet someone had let loose near the church wall, and Cassia stood near the solicitor's stall with Nan at her elbow, weeping already, though nothing had happened yet, because Nan had guessed, the way Nan guessed everything, that something was about to. The Duke of Calderhurst crossed the green on foot, in his plain riding coat rather than anything grander, and the crowd's noise dimmed the way a room dims when it senses weather changing, until by the time he reached her, there was a wide, hushed circle of Marlowick's whole population watching a duke stand bareheaded before his grandmother's companion in the middle of the fair. "I was told," he said, loud enough to carry, "that I must ask you somewhere the whole county could hear, and be willing to be refused there too. I find I am willing. I have been refused twice already, and survived it. And I understand there is a saying that no woman refuses the Duke twice, though you and I both know that saying was wrong from the moment I first met you in a gallery with a tray of physic in your hands." He went down on one knee on the green grass in front of the whole assembled parish, apple sellers and blacksmiths, and the vicar and Nan Pettibone weeping openly into her apron, and said, "Cassia Rowe, I have nothing left to offer you that a ledger could hold. No settlement I need you to sign, no name you need to save, no crisis left for you to solve. I have only myself, unpriced, asking to be your husband because I cannot any longer imagine being anyone's husband but yours." Will you marry me? She let the silence stretch one long breath, not from cruelty, but because she wanted, this last time, to feel the whole weight of being asked in the open, the way her father had never been given the chance to be believed in the open. And then she said, clear enough for the whole green to hear it, "Yes, I will. And I will tell you, since half the county is listening, that I refused you twice, not because I doubted you, but because I had spent my whole life being someone nobody thought worth crossing a room for, let alone kneeling to, and I needed, once, to be asked as though I mattered before witnesses, the same as any lady born to expect it." He rose and took her hands, careless of the mud on his knee, and the green erupted the way village greens do, applause, and someone's fiddle striking up too early. And the robin, which had followed the season's warmth to a hedge near the church wall, sang on through all of it, indifferent and constant, the way birds go on singing over every human triumph and grief alike. They were married quietly a fortnight later, in the small chapel at Calderhurst rather than the grand one in town, with only family and the Marlowick household present, Nan weeping through the whole service as she had promised she would, Beatrice scattering late asters down the aisle with the gravity of a child who understands she has been given an important task, and the Duchess, upright in her chair without need of a cane, pronouncing the whole affair, afterward, exactly proper and not nearly grand enough, which from her was the highest praise available. Lady Honoria, cleared of any shadow her flight had cast, found in the following spring a steadier match in a plain-spoken army captain who admired her honesty above her fortune, and wrote to Cassia every Christmas after, in a hand-grown warmer each year. Mr. Grissom kept his custom and his conscience both, and told the story of his one great honesty to any customer who would listen, embellishing it a little further with each telling. Edmund Vane lived out his years in Cumberland on his allowance, and wrote twice brief letters to his cousin that were neither forgiven nor unread, and Julian answered them both, briefly, because mercy, once given, is not a thing to be taken back merely because it is inconvenient to keep giving. Fenwick was asked to stand godfather to the first child, an honor he accepted with visible embarrassment and evident delight. And nearly a year to the day after a carriage had once fled down the drive at a dead run before breakfast, Cassia stood again in the still-room window with a tray in her hands, expecting no one, when she heard familiar footsteps in the gallery and turned to find her husband in the doorway, exactly where she had first collided with him. Only now he crossed the room without hesitation, steadied the tray with one hand and her waist with the other, and said, against her hair, no woman refuses the Duke twice. They used to say, and she laughed, setting the tray safely aside at last, and answered, they never accounted for the third time, or for a Duke fool enough to kneel for it, and outside the window the robin, or its child, or some bird enough like it that no one troubled to ask, went on singing into the ordinary gold of another September morning. If this story warmed you, the long, stubborn road from a locked trunk to a green full of witnesses, then pull your chair nearer the fire, because there is always another one waiting to be told here, and the kettle is already on. I would love to know, in the comments, which refusal was your favorite, the still room, the garden, or the one that finally brought a Duke to his knees in front of the whole parish. And if you have ever waited, the way Cassia waited, to be asked as though you mattered, that story belongs in the comments too. Stay a while and keep a place by the hearth, subscribe, and I will keep the candle lit for the next one. Until then, sleep well and be brave enough to refuse the easy answer when the true one is still waiting to be asked properly.